to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it, and we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it.
Hawa. What's up, family? Thank you for being here once again. I hope you like this new series that I'm bringing to you guys, The Untold Ancient American Truth. There's gonna be so many parts of this because there's so many different topics, there's so much information, and just like Glenn Beck just told us, a lot of this has been intentionally erased and intentionally left out of the school textbooks, so you know nothing about this information. You assume everything has already been studied, that it has been taught, that it has already been discussed and explained. But like Bob said, right? Half the story has never been told. So now you see the light. Oh, stand up for your right. Alright, so in this first part, what I want to show is some information I found here, and it's actually from a person named Agassiz. I'm gonna let you know who he is. He's actually one of the most renowned and respected geologists that has existed, basically. So we're going to talk about what he has to say about America and how it is the true old world. Alright, we're also going to read from a book I found. I thought it was really good, and we're going to start reading from the book Traditions of the Earliest Visits of Foreigners to North America by Ruben Duret. And we're going to go to page 70 here, as it says here on the top. Traditions of the Earliest Americans. It says America, the oldest of the continents. After the discovery by Columbus in the latter part of the 15th century, it was customary to speak of the Eastern Hemisphere as the Old World and the Western as the New. No one seemed to care how long the Western Hemisphere may have existed before this discovery. The discovery was new, and therefore the country was deemed new also. After the discovery by Columbus made it known, many alleged discoverers, before unheard of, came into existence from different nations. Besides the 6 discoveries set forth in this article, there were Arabians and Italians and Dutch and Poles, Japanese, Jews, we're talking about Hebrews, and others who laid claim to this honor. None of these, however, could make out a satisfactory claim to its discovery, and it may not have been possible to satisfy all doubts in any one case. We knew that the Eastern Hemisphere existed and had existed for thousands of years. But disregarding the claims of some of the ancients, we did not certainly know of the Western world until it was discovered by Columbus, and as the discovery was new, the country discovered was called new also. Alright, so it says they actually disregarded the claims of some of the ancients. And again, we've been also referencing that, when they're talking about their mythos or their mythology or religion, ancient accounts, like I'm talking about the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and Assyrians, they're really talking about, as Ignatius Donnelly says, Atlantis or the Atlantis gods, or what happened in America in ancient times, the true old world. Alright, so they disregarded those claims of some of these ancients. We have no certain way of arriving at the age of continents or of determining the relative age of any one of them, especially if the age is to be calculated in years. Geologists get over the difficulty of estimating in years by the use of such terms as eras, ages, periods, epochs, etc. They will tell you what geological age a thing belongs to by the fossils embedded in it, but when they undertake to tell the year in which anything existed, it is by estimation only. Alright, so letting you know that they can't really ever tell the exact year that something is. they give it they reference it by epochs and eras, right? Like they say the Pleistocene era, right? So they don't know what exact year. He's basically letting you know. It's all guessing, estimation only. Professor Taylor estimated that the North American continent had existed between 100 and 400 millions of years since it was prepared for life, since plants and animals began to be developed and live upon it. To say nothing of 400 million years, 100 millions present a period of which the human mind can have no rational conception. He's basically saying, how can we really know and understand the difference between 400 million years and 100 million years? Once it's past a certain age, once it passes a certain point, we're just like, okay, yeah, that was a long time ago. Do we really understand? That's what he's basically saying. Can we really have a rational conception of chronology and time? We could form quite as just a conception of 400 million as of 100 million. Both terms suggest an incomprehensible duration of time. It probably makes no difference, therefore, whether we designate this period as 400 million or 100 million or 1 million, or even a less number of years. There's no danger of an error being discovered in the addition, because there has been no fixed unit to start from in estimating the existence of a continent in years, and possibly can be done. Alright, so there's real no way to basically let you know how old a continent is. So that goes with all continents. So who's to say, Africa's older? Who's to say Australia's older? Who's to say Europe's older? Asia, right? Alright, so who's to say America's not older or as old, right? If, however, it has been between 100 million and 400 million of years since animals and plants began life in America, how long did America exist before it was fit for the life of man? If the theory of the nebulous origin of the Earth be correct, quite as long as a period may have been necessary for the central nebulous mass out of which our solar system was evolved to break up into sections, and for these sections to whirl around in space until they were consolidated into worlds. Alright, so let's dodge the hijack with the whole space thing. Alright, gotta be firm, right? Grounded, have a clear perspective and orientation, or are you still spinning on the ball? Alright, so continues, says, our planet probably acted in common with others until cooling formed a crust sufficiently strong for an ocean bed over its internal fires, and rains to descend from an atmosphere which held them in suspension, until they covered the crust with the waters of a universal ocean. Then it began to act for itself by eroding this crust and contracting from further cooling, until it pressed the sides of sections of the crust upon one another and crushed and pushed them upward in the confusion of a crumpled, peaked, and valleyed mountain range. Such were the first mountains of the earth, and they formed the nucleus of the North American continent, along the line which separates the United States from Canada. So they're saying that the oldest mountains of the world have this kind of description, formation, etc. And it's found in North American continent too. So it is known as the Laurentian Range, and it is made up of the first metamorphosed sedimentary rocks that were formed. It extended from the Atlantic Ocean on the east along the trend of the St. Lawrence River and the lakes westward beyond the Mississippi River, nearly to the subsequent erected Rocky Mountains, a distance of some 2,000 miles in length and 300 miles in width. This continent may have been outlined beneath the universal ocean long before its upheaval, but this was its first appearance above the water, and it was before any one of the other continents made its appearance above the sea. Again, they're talking about North American continent, right? It says this continent may have outlined beneath the universal ocean long before its upheaval, but this was its first appearance above the water. And what does it say? It was before any one of the other continents made its appearance above the sea. Talking about America. As it first appeared, America was a mass of metamorphic rocks, contorted and crumpled and twisted and jumbled into a shape which had nothing of the appearance of suitableness for plant or animal life. It would require much time after this bleak and barren assemblage of rocks got above the water for them to expand into a continent and assume a fit form for the habitation of man. It had to go through the long years of the Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, and possibly into the Tertiary period before it could be ready for human life. It, however, got the start of other continents, and there is no good reason for supposing that it did not continue in the lead until it became the habitation of the original man. Alright, are we talking about Adam and Eve, the terrestrial paradise where the original man was? And we're talking about that North America, right, had a start before the other continents. Before the other continents. So why wouldn't it have the first people? That's what he's basically saying. There is reason, therefore, for believing that the existence of the Earth from its nebulous stage to the beginning of the Azoic age was as long as from its beginning in the Azoic to the Cenozoic age, and if this be so, another fearful period of from 100 to 400 millions of years would have to be added to the entire duration of the Earth. Such figures, however, are about as reliable as counting the sands of the seashore without seeing them, so it's not reliable. It has recently, however, been contended by some of the most eminent of geologists that North America was the first of the continents. Again, it has recently, however, been contended by some of the most eminent of geologists that North America was the first of the continents. In the Canadian Geological Surveys, the earliest sedimentary rocks were found in the Laurentian Mountains. And as no older rocks have been found anywhere, America was pronounced the firstborn of the continents. Again, America was pronounced the firstborn of the continents because they found, again, the earliest sedimentary rocks in the Laurentian Mountains in Canada. And as no older rocks have been found anywhere in the world, this is in Canada, people, America was pronounced the firstborn of the continents. Louis Agassiz, and speaking of America, as the oldest of the continents, grew eloquent and expressed himself in his Geological Sketches, Volume 1, page 1, and paragraph 1 in the following language. And we got this in the ancient Masonic teachings books, right? They were quoting him, and this is what is being quoted again. So as you can see, I'm not the only one saying America is the true old world. Now, who is Louis Agassiz? So it says here, Jean-Louis Rodolphe Agassiz, May 28, 1807, and died December 14, 1873. Was a Swiss-American biologist and geologist recognized as an innovative and prodigious scholar of Earth's natural history. All right, prodigious scholar of Earth's natural history. Is this pseudo? You know what I mean? This is actually a verifiable source, a scholarly source. Agassiz grew up in Switzerland, and he studied and received Doctor of Philosophy and medical degrees at Erlangen and Munich, respectively. After studying with Cuvier and Humboldt in Paris, So Humboldt is another explorer, a chronicler, a famous historian source, also quoted in many books as a source for the New World, right? America, in those times of discovery. It says Agassiz basically studied with them, right? Agassiz was appointed professor of natural history at University of Neuchâtel. After visiting Harvard University mid-career, he emigrated to the United States in 1847 and became professor of zoology and geology at Harvard, and to head its Lawrence Scientific School and found its Museum of Comparative Zoology. Agassiz is known for his regimen of observational data gathering and analysis. He made vast institutional and scientific contributions to zoology and geology and related areas, including writing multi-volume research books running to thousands of pages. He is particularly known for his contributions to ichthyological classification, including of extinct species, and to the study of geological history, and to the study of geological history, including to the founding of glaciology. In the 21st century, his resistance to Darwinism, evolution, and the scientific racism implicit in his writings on human polyganism has tarnished his reputation and led to controversies over his legacy. So he went against the Darwinism evolution because he knew better. He did research. He saw it didn't fit with what he was finding, right? And the history and his science and the geology and everything he was researching and studying. All right, so he becomes controversial, and this basically takes him out of our textbooks. Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Because as you can see here, let me just zoom in a little bit. Right, this is Louis Agassiz. Again, Geological Sketches, 1866, this version of it, and we're gonna go right to, basically it's right in the beginning almost, and it says here, contents, page 1, volume 1, America the Old World. America the Old World. Again, firstborn among the continents. Firstborn among the continents. Though so much later in culture and civilization than some more recent birth, America, so far as her physical history is concerned, has been falsely denominated the New World. Again, has been falsely denominated the New World. This is not the New World. This is the true Old World. Hers was the first dry land lifted out of the waters. Hers, the first shore washed by the ocean that enveloped all the earth beside. And while Europe, listen to this, while Europe was represented only by islands rising here and there above the sea. Oh, sorry about that. America already stretched in an unbroken line of land from Nova Scotia to the far west. Again, America, the Old World. All right. So continuing in this book, right, it says here, the next chapter, America, the first inhabited of the continents. Okay, so it was the belief of the wise Thomas Jefferson that America was the first seat of the human race, and that the eastern hemisphere was peopled from the western. A letter written by him to President Stiles of Yale College in 1786, while he represented the United States at the court of France, was published in the American Museum for November 1787, page 492. Go verify the source. From this letter, the following extract is taken, clearly stating Mr. Jefferson's belief that the first inhabitants of Asia, who so much resembled the American Aborigines, went from America to Asia instead of coming from Asia to America. Again, says here that Mr. Jefferson believed that the first inhabitants of Asia, who so much resemble the American Aborigines, and we ain't talking about the what you think of a Chinese person of today or any of the light-skinned Mongol-looking, Siberian-looking Asians, but we're talking about the original Negroid, right? Negritos, they call them, in the Philippines and the Malays. You know, all this is Asia too, and they do resemble the American Aborigines. And it says here that they actually went from America to Asia instead of coming from Asia to America. I return you my thanks for the communication relative to the Western country. When we reflect how long we have inhabited those parts of America which lie between the Allegheny and the ocean, that no monument has ever been found in them, which indicate the use of iron among its aboriginal inhabitants. That they were as far advanced in arts, at least as the inhabitants on the other side of the Allegheny. A good degree of infidelity may be excused as to the new discoveries, which suppose regular fortifications of brickwork to have been in use among the Indians on the waters of the Ohio. Entrenchments of earth they might indeed make, but bricks is more difficult. The art of making it may have preceded the use of iron, but it would suppose a greater degree of industry than men in the hunter state usually possess. I should like to know whether General Parsons himself saw actual bricks among the remains of fortifications. I suppose the settlement of our continent is of the most remote antiquity. The similitude between its inhabitants and those of the eastern parts of Asia render it probable that ours are descended from them or they from ours. The latter is my opinion, that they are from ours. Founded on this single fact, among the red inhabitants of Asia, there are but few languages radically different. All right, so listen to this. But among our Indians, the number of languages is infinite, and we've gone over this in other presentations, right? There was more languages here in the Americas, more dialects than in Africa. And they say Africa has, hundreds of languages. There's more languages than in the Congo region in America. All right, you can go and research that. All right, so he's saying here that, in Asia, there are a few radically different languages, but among the Indians, the number of languages is infinite, which are so radically different as to exhibit at present no appearance of their having been derived from a common source. The time necessary for the generation of so many languages must be immense. All right, there's a long history of habitation here. Mr. Jefferson gave the best reason he could for his belief that the first inhabitants went from America to Asia instead of coming from Asia to America. Since his time, however, scientific research in its wonderful progress has developed other reasons for the truth of this theory. Scientists have exhumed in America the skeletons of past geological ages and the remains of dead human beings, which gave evidence of as early existence here as any yet found outside of America. Had Mr. Jefferson lived to this time, he might have been foremost among the scientists whose investigations look to solving the problem of the oldest continent and the first human beings on the globe. Alright, so they're saying that I guess after Jefferson died, there were some discoveries that show that there's actually been habitation here for thousands of years, even possibly millions, as we're about to read. Correlating with this, the new scientist also made some research on this. Basically the same. It says here, the father of all men is 340,000 years old by Colin Barris. Albert Perry, that was the person's name, carried a secret in his DNA, a Y chromosome so distinctive that it reveals new information about the origin of our species. It shows that the last common male ancestor down the paternal line of our species is over twice as old as we thought. Alright, twice as old, found in America. But he is the oldest, proven to be the oldest, carrying this Y chromosome, and he's in South Carolina. Continuing, it says, Perry, recently deceased, was an African American who lived in South Carolina. A few years ago, one of his female relatives submitted a sample of his DNA to a company called Family Tree DNA for genealogical analysis. Genetics can use such samples to work out how we are related to one another. Hundreds of thousands of people have now had their DNA tested. The data from these tests have shown that all men gained their Y chromosome from a common male ancestor. This genetic atom lived between 60,000 and 140,000 years ago. All men except Perry, that is. So stop right there. They're telling you, we thought all men descended from one common ancestor, right? 140,000 years ago, which they teach us was in Africa. But all men except Perry, right? That is, right? When family tree DNA technicians tried to place Perry on the Y chromosome family tree, they just couldn't. His Y chromosome was like no other so far analyzed. deeper roots. It says here, Michael Hammer, geneticist at the University of Arizona Tucson, heard about Perry's unusual Y chromosome and did some further testing. His team research revealed something extraordinary. Perry did not descend from the genetic Adam. In fact, his Y chromosome was so distinct that his male lineage probably separated from all others about 338,000 years ago. Alright? I mean, we gotta be careful when they say this genetic Adam, because in their eyes, from what they've taught us all our lives, the genetic Adam came out of Africa. But they don't really know if that was the Adam. They're just calling it the first male or first person genetic Adam. But the old world is on this side. You know, I told you, you know, the Hebrews are over here. So where does the genetic Adam really start? And how far ago? As you can see, they traced it back to an indigenous copper colored tribal person from this side of the world, America, not Africa. Let's continue. Others, judging from the similarity of those religious rites, have conjectured that it was peopled by the 10 tribes at the dispersion of Israel. Some think it received its population from China or Japan. Others that it was colonized by some wandering tribes of Japhet, who penetrated into the trackless regions of North America by the Straits of Asia. Some have been bold enough to assert that America was not inundated at the deluge, and that consequently the Aborigines were antediluvians and the most ancient people on earth, which last assertion is correct. So he's telling us, this author, is that this last idea is the correct one. And we just read, right, how the oldest Y chromosome was dated back to a man in South Carolina, a so-called African American, a copper-colored aboriginal indigenous person of America. And as it correlates here, it's the antediluvian people, the Aborigines, right? And this is the correct assertion. They didn't all perish or die when part of the land was sunk. Alright, you've been here. It says here that the Red Indians were the oldest inhabitants of America, known to white men. You know, dodge the hijack when they're talking about these colors, right? Red, they're talking about copper color, brown, dark brown, the so-called Negro, or what red are they really talking about? You know, so though there were here doubtless older beings who antedated them by many centuries and had many traditions as to their origin, but none sufficiently divested of myth and absurdity to lead to a rational conclusion as to the first country inhabited by them or the beginning of its occupation. They had some vague traditions of a very long ago people who were inhabitants of this country before them, but nothing sufficiently definite for reliable information as to the character or the time of this people. Some tribes believed that their ancestors had sprung from the ground in this country, and that they and their descendants had never lived in any other land. So, sprout from the ground. In the Old Testament, how is Adam made? From the soil, right? From the ground. Alright, so others believed that their ancestors had come from a distant land, but they could give no intelligent account as to where that distant land might be or when they left it and came to this. The traditions of the wigwam throw no satisfactory light on the dark problem as to which of the continents was first inhabited by man. All information on this subject that is worth knowing has come from another source, and that source is not from the living of the present or of the unknown past. As we must look into the rock-built graveyards of buried fossilized animals to learn their history, so we must exhume the relics and skeletons of dead and forgotten human beings to learn where and how they began life on the earth and on this continent. So just to get an orientation and perspective of what they're talking about when they're saying quaternary period, when in the National Geographic website it says that the quaternary period began 2.6 million years ago and extends into the present. So it's still going on, but it goes all the way back to 2.6 million years ago. Alright? So again, we just read in the book that in Europe or in the Eastern Hemisphere, man can be traced all the way back to the Quaternary Age. All right. Now it continues, says, as early, however, as they indicate the presence of man in the Eastern Hemisphere, there have been findings of his relics and his bones in America, which show his presence here as early, if not earlier. Again, we're talking about as early as 2.6 million years ago or earlier than the Eastern Hemisphere, okay? Earlier than 2.6 million years ago. Evidences of man in America during the Quaternary Age, which some geologists estimate as 200,000 years ago, while others make the time much longer, have been found in the sands and gravels drifted by glacial currents and in localities with surrounding, possibly indicating the Tertiary Age. The Tertiary Age, so even older. So again, for a clear perspective and orientation of what they're saying here, now in the Britannica.com website, right, Encyclopedia Britannica, it says here the Tertiary period is an interval of geologic time lasting from approximately 66 million to 2.6 million years ago. It is the traditional name for the first of the two periods in the Cenozoic era, 66 million years ago to the present. The second is the Quaternary period, 2.6 million years ago to the present. So, all right, we're talking about that these findings could go as far back as at least 2.6 million years ago up to 66 million years ago. So how do they know where? That's what he's saying earlier. How do they know where to put it and what exact year? So is it 2.6 million years ago or 50 million years ago? You know what I mean? After, like he said earlier, 400,000 years, 400 million years, to us is all the same. We just say, hey, wow, that sounds like a long time ago. But when we start looking at history, right, and how they teach us, right, chronology and the evolution of man, the Darwinism, you can see Louis Agassiz, right? He didn't go for that. He didn't go for that. That's why he became controversial. All right. So again, they found evidence of man in America during the Quaternary Age, again, but even possibly indicating the Tertiary Age. We just read, we have a clear perspective now and orientation. We're talking about a long time ago in America, right? Evidence continues, says, in the glacial drift on a bluff in the valley of the Delaware River near Trenton, New Jersey, have been found rudely chipped argillite implements, which scientists have pronounced Paleolithic. They were found embedded in the sands and gravel, which clearly indicated that they had reposed undisturbed ever since they had been deposited there by the glacial flood, which deposited the sands and the pebbles around them. The hard stone of which they had been made could not have been worn or chipped into the shape they bore by any force except that of the hand of man, and hence it is inferred that man was there when the current of the melting ice of the early glacial period bore them there. This would take man back thousands of years beyond the Quaternary Age to his possible existence in America in the Tertiary Age. Again, Tertiary Age, we just read in Encyclopedia Britannica, it's from 2.6 million years ago to 66 million years ago. Where then? This evidence they found, what year was it? All right, even if it was 2.6 million years ago, you know, the least, that's old, but it could go even more back than that. So imagine, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a false chronology, and we're also talking about that because of the false dating they used, carbon dating, the science they use, which has been proven to have flaws by other scholars, you know. That's why we get these crazy numbers and this out of place archaeology and scientific findings because of the false history we are taught. It makes sense because we've been told a lie. All right. African Americans Y chromosome sparks shift in evolutionary timetable by Alan Boyle, science direct editor at NBC News. So it says here, scientists say an African American male's odd genetic signature suggests that the human Y chromosome's lineage goes back further in time than they thought. The study focuses on the analysis of a DNA sample that was obtained from an African American living in South Carolina and submitted to the Genographic Project, a National Geographic effort aimed at mapping human origins and migration. The funny thing about this sample is that it didn't match up with any of the previously known genetic signatures for the Y chromosome, which is passed down from father to son. Alright, so do you understand what they're saying? It's saying that his DNA doesn't match what they have in their records, in their Y chromosome database. Alright, his is unique. This African, so-called African American living in South Carolina, America. Continues, says nobody expected to find anything like this, Hammer said in a news release. A team led by Fernando Mendez, a researcher in Hammer's lab, analyzed more than 240,000 DNA base pairs on the African American's Y chromosome. A comparison of the differences between the mystery genetic signature and previously known signatures led the team to conclude that the most recent common ancestor for the entire group lived about 338,000 years ago. Okay, according to them. That goes further back than fossil records goes for anatomically modern humans, Hammer said. Alright, you're hearing that, right? The fossils records speak to 195,000 years or 200,000 years, he said. It also goes further back than previous date for the most recent common ancestor based on Y chromosome analysis, which is in the range of 142,000 years. So, how significant is that? Because this is what they teach us, right? That first humans, the first anatomically modern humans, and the oldest ancestor with the Y chromosome, is in Africa. That's what they've been teaching us all our life. But this new research, this new analysis of this DNA from this man in South Carolina, this aboriginal man, right, copper colored tribe found here, goes back even further, right? And he's in America. Alright, this is the true old world. Continuing this book, it says, in the auriferous gravels of an old riverbed in Calaveras County, California, was found at the bottom of a mining shaft, 150 feet below the surface, the skull of a human being. Over it had been deposited 4 successive beds of gold-bearing drift and 5 streams of lava from volcanoes long since extinct. The gold-bearing gravels in which it was found belonged to the Tertiary Age, and man is therefore assumed to have been in California during that age. Again, they found a human skull deep down in deposits that are supposed to be from the Tertiary Age, is what they're telling us. Alright, and I read this actually in the hidden history of the human race. It's a great book, and there's so many findings there. There's also other books, Forbidden History, Forbidden Archaeology, and these are great books. All the out of place objects, skulls, skeletons, animals they found in deposits that they're telling us are millions of years old, and they're not supposed to be there. Many other instances of the relics of man found in the glacial drift might be cited, but the above 3 are enough to show that he was in America as early as he was in the Eastern Hemisphere, and perhaps earlier, and that America did not need immigrants from the East or from any other terrestrial source to begin her population, because we had our own indigenous aboriginals to this land of the soil, from the soil, created from Hawa, right? Created by Hawa, the framer, the shaper. Again, America possibly had citizens to spare, while the Eastern Hemisphere was void of inhabitants. Again, America possibly had citizens to spare, while the Eastern Hemisphere was void of inhabitants. Besides the three cases before cited, which carried the inhabitants of America back beyond the Quaternary and into the Tertiary age, there are examples of man's very early appearance upon the American continent, in which the time is sometimes given in years. In the Mammoth Cave of Kentucky, a mummy was to be seen early in the last century, about the age of which no reliable conjecture was formed, from the fact that it was said to have been removed from an adjacent cave without nothing with sufficient particularity the original position it occupied. As it appeared in the Mammoth Cave, it was sitting in an excavation about 4 feet square and 3 feet deep. Now they're talking about a mummy, right? They found in Kentucky in a Mammoth Cave. It says the skeleton, that of a female, was perfectly preserved, with the flesh and skin dried upon it. It was clad first in the skin of a deer, and over this was a mantle made of the inner bark of the linden tree. The hair was cut short and was of a dark red color. The woman was above the average size and was neither black nor red, but of a light complexion. By her side was a large reticule or sack made of the inner bark of the linden tree. In this ample portmanteau were the following articles: 1 cap of woven or knit bark, 7 headdresses made of the quills of birds, so put together that when placed upon the head, the quilled ends would bind the head, while the feathered ends would expand like an umbrella and make a showy headdress. Hundreds of seeds of a dark color, strung together like beads, a number of the red hoofs of the fawn, strung together into a necklace, the claw of an eagle with a string through it so it could be worn as a pendant, the jaw of a bear, seemingly designed to be worn also as a pendant, the skins of the 2 rattlesnakes, with 14 rattles still upon one of them, and a quantity of coloring matter done up in leaves, a small bunch of threads or strings made of the sinews of the deer, a number of needles made of bone, and 2 whistles of cane. How long she was an occupant of the cave we have no means of determining, or even of rationally estimating. But if the cave was 2,000,000 years old, as stated by Professor Shaler, she might be allowed a few dozen of these years for her enjoyment of the darkness and solitude of her subterranean abode. So they're saying they found a mummy here in Kentucky that's at least 2,000,000 years old. All right. Also, did you know that the oldest mummies were actually in Chile and Peru and not in Egypt? Since the early 1900s, almost 300 human mummies have been uncovered along the coast of southern Peru and northern Chile, including adults, children, infants, and miscarried fetuses. With some dated to as far back as 50 BC, there are the oldest mummies discovered in the world today. Alright, you hear that? Not in Egypt. They were made by a group of hunter-gatherers known as the Chinchorro people, who were mummifying their dead roughly 2,000 years before the ancient Egyptians began mummifying their pharaohs. The dates that we have for the bodies are from 7,000 years ago. So they have more relative antiquity in terms of international work on the human body than that found in Egypt, says Medina Para. Alright? And in Wikipedia we read, the Chinchorro mummies. The Chinchorro mummies are mummified remains of individuals from the South American Chinchorro culture, found in what is now northern Chile. They are the oldest examples of artificially mummified human remains, having been buried up to 2,000 years before the Egyptian mummies. While the earliest mummy that has been found in Egypt dated around 3000 BC, the oldest anthropogenically modified Chinchorro mummy dates from around 50 BC. The oldest naturally mummified mummy recovered from the Atacama Desert is dated around 7020 BC. You're hearing that? That's almost 9 to 10,000 years ago, people, right? So where is the true old world? Shell midden and bone chemistry suggest that 90% of the people's diet was seafood. Many ancient cultures of fisher folk existed, tucked away in the arid river valleys of the Andes, but the Chinchorro made themselves unique by their dedicated preservation of the dead. Alright, so where is the true old world? While excavating for the gasworks in New Orleans, a human skeleton was found in the delta of the Mississippi below 4 successive forests and pronounced by Dr. Fowler to have been there 15,000 years. That mysterious people who antedated the Red Indian and covered the Mississippi Valley with mounds, circumvallations, temples, and fortifications, and scattered everywhere stone axes, flint arrowheads, pottery, pipes, and ornaments of copper and clay, may have been the autochthones of America. Some of their mounds, and especially those immense piles at Cahokia and Grave Creek, remind us of the mass heaped over the body of Aliatis near Sardis. But unlike that monarch's mound, believed to have existed 2,500 years, they furnish no key to the time at which they were reared. Trees have been found growing upon some of them, whose annulations show them to be 800 years old, but this determined nothing as to the real age of the mounds. The trees that measured 800 years may have been preceded by others, and those again by others of equal or greater age, and so on, until thousands of years were exhausted in the interminute calculation. Some of these trees may have antedated the giant redwoods of California, or the fossil forest of Yellowstone Park, but we have nothing to guide us in arriving at a just conclusion as to their age. In the midst of these perplexities, we can have no reason to doubt that the power which is said to have created man in Asia might have created him elsewhere and placed him in habitable quarters in America before any part of the Eastern Hemisphere was ready for his occupancy. Alright, so they're talking about Hawa, that power which is said to have created man, right? Hawa, right? Put in America, right? People, before any part of the Eastern Hemisphere was ready for his occupancy. We're talking about the other side. So before they were ready to have people based on the land and how it was forming, America already had a habitable quarters, it says, right? Habitable quarters, a paradise, a terrestrial paradise, a Garden of Eden. The first formed rocks which have yet been seen upon the globe, and the earliest forms of life yet discovered, and the oldest human relics which have yet been found were in America. Again, the first formed rocks which have yet been seen upon the globe in America. The earliest forms of life yet discovered in America. The oldest human relics which have yet been found were in America. If therefore man first lived and died and laid down his bones in the Western world before he died and laid them down in the Eastern Hemisphere, why should we look for his origin in the East instead of the West? If there's so much evidence, correlation, history, scientific research, evidence proving that this is the true old world, why do we continue to look for the origins of man in the East instead of the West? Why not claim him where we first find his remains, instead of troubling ourselves about the time of his coming and the place when he came? They don't know anything. They're so confused they found people over here. They're wasting so much time troubling themselves about his coming, about how you got here and where you came from, that they ain't looking at the foundational truth that you've been here. You are ancient autochthones of America. The Orientals have not been able in thousands of years to fix the latitude and longitude of the Garden of Eden, where the human race is claimed to have first begun existence. And as the question is still open, the Occidentals may reasonably claim America as the first land above the ocean and the first inhabited by man, until the proof is made clear of an earlier inhabited continent. Until they can prove, please prove it, prove we are wrong, prove this is the old world. Until then, America is the first land above the ocean and the first inhabited by man. If America was the firstborn and first inhabited of the continents, she is entitled to the place of honor in the construction and the peopling of the globe. In the construction and the peopling of the globe. Touch the hijack, the plane, the four corners. Other continents, like the American, may have had contemporaneous foundations laid down in the ancient seas that enveloped the infant world. America, however, was the first built up and the first to show dry land above the universal ocean. There is deeply implanted in our nature a love of the distant past, and the nearer it approaches the confines of the dark unknown, the more we are enamored of it. We like old things, and the older they are, the better we like them. Americans should be proud to claim theirs as the first of the continents. Again, you, copper-colored aboriginal of America, you should be proud to claim your land as the first of the continents to rise above the waves of the universal ocean, and the first to furnish an abiding place for the human race. The Garden of Eden, the Gardens of Hesperides, right? This is it right here, the terrestrial paradise, right here. A place abiding for the human race. This may be likened by some to those genealogical enthusiasts who would trace their descent from Adam, but such extravagance can hardly eradicate the sentiment. They are proud to look back to the humble beginning of barbarian man upon this continent and to follow his progress through incalculable ages to the splendors of the present and the possibilities of the future. America, long deprived of the honor of her proper place among the continents by being called the New World, has at last been pronounced by geologists the first to exist, and the analogical inference is reasonable that she was the first to be inhabited. Americans expect of scientists that they will continue to study the rock-leaved volumes of the world and to search among the undestroyed remains of primeval man until it is clearly determined that as America is the oldest of the continent, she was also the first to be inhabited by man. Alright? So again, 1800s, we have a renowned scholar, geologist, letting us know that America is the first land out of the primordial waters. And this paper, this author we're reading from, he's letting us know that finally somebody, right, made an analogical inference, pronounced that America is the first to exist, the first to be inhabited by man. Well, I hope you like these two chapters that I read from this book. Again, we read from Traditions of the Earliest Visits of Foreigners to North America by the author Ruben Duret. So I can go on and show you numerous references and correlation that America is proven to be the actual real old world. You know, whether it was a piece of Lemuria and Atlantis all together and only that part sank, or it came after those two sank, but it is, like the book said, one of the first lands out of the primordial waters. America was very ancient. Alright, so I wanted you know, I know we've been talking about indigenous aborigines, the copper colored tribes, in the last 3 videos, but before I continued, and when I want to get into the enslavement of the American Indian, before I continue, I wanted you to have that kind of perspective. You know, this is old, you are original, you are ancient. This is the true old world. So you got to look at things from that perspective from now on with the rest of the information that I'm going to give you, especially when it comes to slavery. Alright, because you were already over here, you're ancient.
America's history didn't begin with Christopher Columbus came over. There were ancient cities with advanced architectures all across North America. Did you know that? Hundreds of years before Columbus came. You guys think, oh, the Indians, they didn't scar the land. No, not true. These were cities as large as any in the world at the time. London or Rome, they were metropolises. Archaeologists say they have found evidence of 200,000 actual cities of mound-like structures all across North America that were here long before Columbus. But we don't know anything about them. Why? Why? Especially when you hear what you're about to hear. I want to show you 3 incredible examples of these Indian mounds that were discovered. But before I show you this, I want to ask yourself, I want you to ask these questions. Was Jackson right? Andrew Jackson, Manifest Destiny, the beginning of that. Was he right that the Native Americans were savages? Or was Jefferson right that there was something going on here that we don't even understand? Maybe they were descendants of Egyptians or Jews, or maybe they were from Asia. Where were these people from? But they weren't savages.